Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome all friends to our online sessions on Sunday morning, and I would like to welcome Zahir with his presentation. Yali Madad Zahir.
Mulali Madanamat, how are you?
Alhamdulillah.
Okay, Bismillah. Yali Madad, everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come again. Today is sort of the culmination of this series on monoreality. I mean, monoreality is a topic that really you can't claim to culminate. It is actually a fundamental part of what we all are trying to understand. And it's something that we could go on and on and on about, but I wouldn't profess to understand monoreality to an extent to be able to go on and on about it. So this is something that we all have to go on a journey for. But in terms of what we're trying to achieve from this series is really to put out some of those fundamental principles and to understand again why this term was raised by the Imam himself and why it is an important term from an Ismaili perspective. So obviously we've had 3 other sessions and they've been sort of spread around a bit. So I thought it would be actually useful just to go over very briefly the kind of fundamentals that we have covered over the last 3 sessions. So one of the things that we looked at is what was the purpose behind looking at this topic? What is it that we were trying to understand? We weren't looking at, a specific part of history or a specific, a principle that we can all look at very easily. This was really about looking at our fundamental concept of what our faith is about, what we are about. So, I've put down there on the left the kinds of things that we wanted to understand. These are all big question items. Okay, to understand creation, to understand ourselves, to understand our relationship with others, to understand the Imam, to understand God. So all these things were really designed to go around looking at these big picture questions and see how does the Ismaili faith fit into giving us answers to these. So one of the things that we went through was going through a lot of theoretical questioning of if we believe X, what happens? If we believe Y, what happens? Can our understanding of this particular way of looking at things be logically sensible? And the fundamental premise that we set about was we cannot just take everything as blindfolded. We can't just accept everything we're given. Even the Quran tells us to think. The Imam tells us to think. And one of the things that we've been trying to do, together, is to look at all these different concepts, to look at, how we have understood from previously, how we are trying to understand going forward, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. So we've looked at lots of Quranic references, we've looked at hadiths, we've looked at the sayings of the Imams. We've had things that have given us affirmations of our own understanding. We've looked at things that may have negated some of our understandings. So there's been a lot of different things that we've been working with. But the point behind where we're trying to get to is, of all these things that we've looked at, we need to try and come to some kind of consensus. So the purpose behind today is really to try and go back over some of the key things we've looked at and to bring these ideas into a much clearer understanding about ourselves, about the Imam, but fundamentally, and this is what always drives me in everything I do, the why, the purpose. What is it that I'm actually doing? Just to follow our faith because we've been told to follow it will never push us enough to the limits. And that is why the Imam always says, question to understand, not to destroy, but question to understand, because it is only when we question to understand that we can possibly find our purpose, our reason for being, and what it is that we need to focus on. So I'm hoping that we will try and get at least part of the way towards that. Again, this is a vast arena, and nobody can claim to answer this in 4, 5, or even 10 sessions. But I'm hoping that along this journey, we can at least try and find some of the guidelines that will give us the way to go forward. So very early on in the series, one of the things we looked at was this whole negation of the concept of time. That we had to look at what we meant by time, what we meant by creation. Our general concept of creation was something that had a starting point and that possibly will have an end point. But that fundamental concept that most of us have grown up with creates two fundamental issues. And the fundamental issues was that it means that God works within a time domain. That means God is subservient to time. But it also meant that there is a separation between God and his creation. And that raised a lot of other issues based on what we are taught in the Quran, what we are taught by the Imams, what our fundamental principles are. So we looked at that whole issue. What we also then did was we looked at what the Imam has said specifically in the memoirs, because the memoirs is actually one of the really, really amazing books, which is for public consumption. Remember that, it is for public consumption. But the concepts that the Imam has put in there are extremely, extremely deep philosophical points that actually most of us don't really get to understand in our lifetimes. And that one chapter of the Imam has laid out an entire curriculum for understanding what the Ismaili faith is about. And two of the things that we highlighted in this was the concept that creation is a perpetual and constant event. So that whole point of creation beginning at a point and ending at a point, the Imam said, no, creation is a constant and perpetual event. And the other thing that we picked up on was this whole thing that there is an entire interdependence of what we call creation with the divine. And the way the Imam puts it is outside his will, outside his thought, all is nothing. That then brought us on to what the Imam had then indicated very clearly within the memoirs, and that was he used two particular things. One was obviously the Imam introduced the whole concept of monoreality, and he differentiated monoreality from monotheism. Monotheism, as we all know, is the belief in one God. And Imam referenced Islam, Christianity, and Judaism as the three Abrahamic faiths that very much believe in monotheism. But Imam differentiated our understanding to say we believe in monoreality, monorealism, not monotheism. And Imam then links monoreality with this concept of manifestation, that what we believe is the concept of creation is actually a very simplistic way of looking at things, and that the reality of what is there is manifestation, and that manifestation and monoreality go hand in hand to enable us to understand what our being and our purpose is. So again, we looked at all of that. We then also looked at some of the things that Maulana Ali has said, that we have understood from other things about who we are and what our goal in life is. So two of the specific things that we referenced time and time again was two of the very famous sayings of Maulana Ali that I think most people should know. And one is, do you consider yourself a small body when the entire universe is contained in you? That was number one. And number two was, he who knows himself knows his Lord. And remember, we asked the question, how can the entire universe be contained in me? And how is it that knowing myself can enable me to know my Lord? And we again went into that in some depth to look at how those questions need to make us address our own fundamental understanding of who we are and why we're here. One of the other things that we looked at quite critically was what Imam has said in the very famous Farman of Usuluddin. Usuluddin is a very, very open Farman in terms of our position, what the soul is, what our goal in life is. And the Imam had given us some very, very clear indications to help us to understand who we are. So just looking at three of the critical things we'd looked at. One was the concept that just as all rainwater reaches the sea once again, in the same way, the soul has its abode, and the soul will always reach back to its original abode, which is the infinite. Now, what the infinite means, what that original soul is, were things that we try to look at, and we all need to still go on that journey. But what was interesting about what the Imam said was not so much that, it was about our potential in life. And Imam very clearly pointed out that if you were to aim at being like Pir Sadruddin, Pir Shams, or Mansur, you can indeed achieve such a status. You can rise even higher. Now that quote is always something that has stuck with me ever since the first time I read it. And that's been over a couple of decades. And that has always made me think about all these people that sit at the top of our ideology, at the top of who we consider to be the greatest men or people of our historical era. How are we supposed to be like them? And what does Imam mean when he talks about going even higher? But then Imam goes on to something that is even more perplexing. And that is, it is not only Hazrat Ali's progeny, the line of Imams, that can attain this status. Whoever is determined enough will be able to reach the goal. And that paragraph, that sentence there, really should hit us very hard. Because we tend to look at God and the Imam as being out of reach of our potential spiritual status. And we need to ask very clearly, what is it that Imam is trying to say? How can that apply to me as a normal murid of the Imam? But note the word, whoever. The Imam does not say any murid or any Ismaili. It clearly says, whoever is determined enough. We then also mentioned what the Imam had said in now a very famous Farman, when he asked the Jamaat about Mansur al-Hallaj. And we need to go back over history and read up on what the story of Mansur al-Hallaj was. And the fundamental thing that the Imam was referring to, I believe, was this thing about Ana al-Haq. I am the truth. Because those are the famous words that Mansur al-Hallaj proclaimed and for which he was severely persecuted. So what is it that we mean when a normal murid can claim to be the truth? And that was something that the Imam had clearly asked us to try and understand, because it was important enough for all of us to look into the detail of being the truth. In the third series, we then looked at the role of the Imam and how does this whole thing of monoreality and manifestation and the position of the soul, what is the role of the Imam within all of that? And we brought out this very important concept of the confluence of two oceans, the Majma'ul Bahrain, and that the Imam straddles these two worlds, of this world and that world, of the Zahir and the Batin, of the monoreality and the manifest, of unity and multiplicity. We all talk about being one with God. God is one, the single soul. And the Imam's position as we went through that session was really about straddling these two worlds, about being aware of that unity, but also being in this world amongst multiplicity to enable people to have a bridge, to enable people to have a means of understanding that from their multiplicity there is a way to that unity. But another very important point within that lecture that we made was this whole concept of the fundamental role of the Imam as Imamun Nas. Remember, we looked at the Arabic grammar and how that grammar means something very specific. And this particular hadith effectively summarizes what we came up with. And the hadith is worth repeating again. Were the world to be bereft of the Imam for but an instant, it would be convulsed with all its inhabitants. And that really bears thinking about very carefully, that if the Imam is not in the world for even an instant, the entire world with all its inhabitants will be destroyed. And we have to ask the question, why? Why is the position of the Imam so critical that it impacts the entire existence of creation? So then we come to really what we're going to talk about today, and that is looking further into the role of the Imam and understanding the Imam much more critically, based on not our personal viewpoints, but based on what we're finding within Hadith, within the Quran, within the sayings of the Imams themselves. And it's using all of that information to try and come to some kind of conclusion of who Imam truly is and what his role truly is. So hopefully today we're going to try and address this thing of understanding the reality of the Imam. We want to look at what it means to be a Mazhar. We use the word all the time. Imam is the Mazhar of God. He is the Mazhar of the light of God. We use this word in so many different ways. But do we really have a clear understanding of what the indication of being a Mazhar is? Remember, Mazhar means manifestation. And we spoke about manifestation and its implications quite a lot in what we were doing. But a more fundamental question. If Imam is the guide who can show us the way to the other side, who can show us the way as the confluence to find the path between this world and that world, how close is the Imam to God? And then, obviously, what is his true role? We are very careful about how we talk about the Imam and our position with vis-a-vis the Imam, or our understanding of Islam, our understanding of Ismailism within the faiths that exist within the global world. And we're all more and more very sensitive about how we discuss that. But I think we also need to be, as Imam says, do not cross the bridge. Build the bridge, but do not cross the bridge. And I've always read that to mean be clear about who you are. Accept that there are lots of other viewpoints, but don't fear what your own viewpoint is. And I think we need to look at that from the perspective of how do we truly understand the Imam. So let's first come to what the Imam has said about what the Imam's role is. And in Usul al-Din, there is a very clear-cut definition of the role of the Imam. And the Imam says, my task is to show you the way to the truth. My task is to show you the way to the truth, so that you may achieve your real destiny, which is the state of fana fillah. Fana stands for annihilation, fi meaning in, and Allah being God. To be fana fillah is to lose oneself in God's essence. The important part here is, it is to show you the way to the truth. But now we have to ask another fundamental question. We have the concept of the master and the student. We are the students. The Imam is the master. And let's go back over the two things that we've already reviewed several times. What Maulana Ali has said, do you consider yourself a small body when the entire universe is contained in you? But remember, we also discussed this as being the potential that we have. That is not where we are today, but that is the potential that the Imam said is in you. And the Imam also said, he who knows himself knows his Lord. That the way for us to truly understand our Lord is to understand ourselves, to look inside ourselves, to understand our own souls. But the question we need to ask is, can the master be any less than the student? If these two things are the potentials that Maulana Ali proclaimed every one of us has, can the master be less than the student in either of those two capacities? Of course not. And the conclusion that we then make from that is, in reality, for the Imam, the entire universe is contained in him. And the reality is that he does know himself, and by knowing himself, he does know his Lord. If those two statements cannot be true for the Imam, how can he, as a master, take us to the position of knowing the reality of those two statements? So let's look at what it means to be the way to the truth. Remember, Sultan Mushah said, my role is to show you the way to the truth. Okay? But let's look at what truth means. And this is from a hadith that was said at the time of Ghadir Qum. We all know the reference to Ghadir Qum. We all know the history behind what happened at Ghadir Qum. But most of us actually focus on the first part of this hadith, whereas it is the last part of the hadith that is actually really critical. And the hadith goes, O Allah, befriend him, referring to Maulana Ali, befriend him who befriends him, and be an enemy to him who is his enemy, i.e., befriend the one who is a friend of Ali, be the enemy of the one who is the enemy of Ali, and help him who helps him, and forsake him who forsakes him, and turn the truth with him wherever he turns. We all understand English. We all know what our grammatical use of English is. When we are talking about the truth, we would normally say, make him follow the truth wherever he goes. That is not what the hadith says. The hadith does not say, make Ali follow the truth. The hadith clearly says, and this is a hadith that is accepted by all Muslims, turn the truth with him. Whatever Ali does, whatever Ali says, whatever Ali thinks, whatever Ali wishes, is the truth. How do we marry that up with my task is the way to show you the truth? So let's keep that question in the back of our minds. Let's now look at what is a topic that is known in Arabic as tasqir, subjugation. This is a really important topic within the Quran, and it is related to the power of God over everything, the power of God over his creation. So let's look at some of the references, and these are only some of the references within the Quran. So, first of all, 754. He covers the night with the day, chasing it rapidly. And he created the sun, the moon, and the stars, subjected by his command. Unquestionably, he is the creation and the command. So note very carefully. He created the sun and the moon and the stars, subjected by his command, i.e., God commands the sun and the moon and the stars to do what they do. Let's look at 347. This is a very famous ayat referring to the famous word kun, be. And the ayat says, when he decrees a thing, he only says to it, be, and it becomes. What is the context behind this? The context behind this is that God rules over all his creation. Whenever God says be, whatever he says happens. He has ultimate command over the entire creation. "24:35", again a very famous ayat. But it's an ayat that we read a lot. It's an ayat that's been referenced a lot. But it's a very difficult ayat to get a full understanding of. And we need to ask ourselves the question, when the Quran says, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. Remember, light is something that gives life. It is light that enables things to work. And the concept behind here is whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth, it exists because of Allah's light. It continues to move and be as it is due to Allah's light. So now let's move on to a different way of looking at subjugation. Now, I'm going to use this term, the perfect man. And the word the perfect man has been used incredibly by all of our peers and dais to refer to the prophets and the imams. The perfect man indicates the perfection of the prophets and the imams. Perfection in the sense that they are what we call fanafillah. They know their Lord. They have the entire universe in them. So the reference of the perfect man you will find in a lot of our historical books. So what does the Quran say about the perfect man? And for ease, let's just think about the Imam whenever we refer to the perfect man. In 45:13, and he has made subservient to you whatsoever is in the heavens and whatsoever is in the earth, all from himself. Most surely there are signs in this for people who reflect. He has made subservient to you whatsoever is in the heavens and whatsoever is in the earth. Let's look at 16:12. God has made the day and the night, the sun and the moon and the stars subservient to you by his command. God has made the day and the night, the sun and the moon, and all the stars subservient to you by his command. Let's look at 31:20. Do you not see that Allah has made what is in the heavens and what is in the earth subservient to you, the perfect man, and made complete to you his favors? So why am I highlighting these things in red? First point, what does it mean for something to be subservient? Something that is subservient is under your command. It is under your control. You have full authority over something that is subservient to you. But this raises a dichotomy. 16:12 clearly says that God has made the sun and the moon and the stars subservient to the perfect man. Whatever the perfect man says, whatever the perfect man wishes, the sun, the moon, and the stars will follow. But we also had this in 754, that the sun and the moon and the stars are subjected to his, God's command, not the perfect man, to God's command. How can both things be true? We have seen a lot of references, and there are many more in the Quran, that talk about the entire creation being subservient to God's command. And there are just as many references in the Quran about those same things being subservient to the perfect man. Which one is correct? So we have to ask ourselves the question, If everything is subservient to God and everything is subservient to the perfect man, what is the relationship between God and the perfect man? Let's look at a different angle of what subservience could mean. Go back to the famous saying of Maulana Ali. Do you consider yourself a small body when the entire universe is contained in you? What was Maulana Ali's indication behind this? If the entire universe is in me, do I not have dominion over the entire universe? Is that not the same thing as God saying that the entire universe has been subjugated to the perfect man? Are these not two ways of saying one and the same? If you consider that subjugation is regarding the physical universe, how can a body have dominion over an entire physical boundary that is so vast? We do not even have the technology to go beyond our solar system. So the Imam is a human body. How can he have dominion over the physical expanse of the universe? So when God says that I'm giving the entire command over the heavens and the earth, and by the heavens and the earth we mean all of creation, to the perfect man, how does that work? And the answer comes back down to us going back over the understanding of monoreality and manifestation. And this comes back down to why I said this topic can never really finish, because this is a fundamental part of what we all need to try and understand more. And it's about understanding that although the physical universe has an expanse, monorealism says that all of that physical expanse, in its essence, can be subjugated to you internally. The soul does not have a physical boundary. The soul, when it is merged with the universal soul, is the source of all the manifestations that you see, regardless of physical expanse. It is the manifestation of one single soul. And if you are the single soul, you have dominion over your manifestation. The manifestation is under the subjugation of the single soul, of the monoreality. So again, we have to ask ourselves the question, if the entire universe is contained in the Imam, if the entire universe is subjugated to the command of the Imam, how does the Imam relate to this whole thing of monoreality? So another thing we need to look at is what philosophically is known as anthropomorphism, giving physical attributes to God. And in most faiths, in Islam, talking about God in any physical sense is deemed to be blasphemous. But the Quran itself talks about the physical attributes of God, and we have to really understand that that is in the Quran. And one of the most famous things that we looked at very early on was this whole concept of bay'ah, what happened in the time of the Prophet, okay, where a group of people actually gave bay'ah to the Prophet, and then verse 48:10 was revealed. Those who swear allegiance unto thee, Muhammad, swear allegiance only unto Allah. The hand of Allah is above their hands. And this was a reference to the Prophet putting his hand over the people who were coming to do bay'ah. And the clear indication in this verse is when the Prophet was putting his hand over theirs, it was the same as God putting his hands above theirs. Another famous hadith. He who did my didar, the Prophet, did Allah's didar. He who saw me in a dream saw Allah. Now, if anybody else had said that, that would have been deemed blasphemous. But the Prophet clearly said that if you see me, you have seen Allah. And Surah 2, Ayat 115. And Allah's is the east and the west. Therefore, wherever you turn, there is the face of Allah. The face of Allah. When we say that Allah has no attributes, Allah has no human characteristics, how can Allah have a face? But it is there in black and white in the Quran. And remember, we also looked at the famous saying of Maulana Ali, where he proclaimed, I am that face of Allah. But now a really important one, and one that gets missed a lot, but it is something that is, looking at everything else, is the one that actually we can really focus on. And that is 57.3. And 57.3 says, in reference to God, He is the first, He is the last, He is the manifest, and He is the hidden, and He knows all things. We can all accept God is the first, God is the last, and He is the hidden. But how is God manifest? Where can we see God? Where can I go? To which part of the world can I go and say, I have seen God, He's manifest? We keep talking about God has no physical attributes, but yet clearly from just these few verses, there is a clear indication that God has some way of referencing physical attributes. And I refer you back to what Maulana Ali said about being the face of Allah. And we have to think clearly, what does it mean when it says God is manifest? Let's look at another aspect of the same trend. And again, we're going to come back over the same ayats. We just looked at 57.3, but look at what 57.3 also says. It says, He knows all things. None of us can argue with that. That is our concept of God. God knows all things. But then let's look at what we recite in our dua every day. 36:12. And we have encompassed everything, and the explanation that is given by most people is the knowledge of everything in a manifest imam. We have encompassed the knowledge of everything in a manifest imam. But yet 57.3 says, He, God, knows all things. So we need to try and address, how do these two things tally? Let's look at the concept of everything. So first question I will ask you. When we normally talk about everything in the sense of God and His creation, I would suspect that most people would exclude God from the word everything. I certainly used to until this was pointed out to me. And look at 28:88. There is no God but He. Everything will perish except His own face. Everything will perish except His own face. So think clearly about what the grammatical indication of this is. If everything will perish except His own face, the indication is that everything of God except His own face, everything of God is part of everything. Because if God wasn't part of everything, there would be no point in making the exception. The reason for putting the word except His own face is that in the Quran itself, God includes Himself within the word everything. So why am I going on about this? Come back to 36:12. And we have encompassed everything in a manifest Imam. We have encompassed the knowledge of or everything in the manifest Imam. What have we just concluded about the word everything? And how is the word everything used in 3612? Again, go back to what Maulana Ali said. I am that face of Allah. And look at 2888. Everything will perish except his own face. Let's look at the concept of a proxy, right? Something that is in place of something else. Imam Muhammad al-Baqir has said, whatever is said about God is about us, and whatever is said about us is about those of our Shia, our followers, who are advanced. Whatever is said about God is about us. Now, look at what we've just been talking about over the last half an hour. All those things that we were referencing, where there were references to God, were then also had references to the perfect man. When we talked about the subservience of creation, when we talked about the manifest attributes, whatever is said about God is about us. These are the words of one of our Imams. And what does it mean to be a vicegerent? A vicegerent is somebody who can take the place of somebody else in totality. The ultimate meaning of vicegerent is, I can do everything that you can do, and I can fully replace what you do. It doesn't mean that I am less than you and I can only do some of what you can do. The purpose philosophically behind a vicegerent is to fully be able to take on the role of the person you are representing. And what about the second part of this saying, where it says, what is said about us is about those of our Shia who are advanced? What is the Imam referring to there? The Imam is talking about what we have looked at within Usul Din. And remember, in Usul Din, the Imam referred to the fact that this status is not only for the progeny of Ali. Whoever tries hard enough will be able to gain that status. Look at what the Imam has said. Whatever is said about us is about those of our Shia who are advanced. We consider the Imam's position to be at a point that we can never achieve. And yet, in Usul Din, the Imam has clearly said that any of us, were we to try hard enough, can achieve the same status. And the Imam here has said, whatever people have said about the position of the Imam is actually about the position of any of our followers that advance far enough. So let's try and look at all of this in the context of monoreality. Now, I haven't clearly said certain words, but I think everybody knows what I've been referring to. And we seem to be very scared of associating humanity with divinity. We all know we are. We all know there is a really difficult fine line that we have to tread. And when we look at divinity and creation outside of the context of monoreality, it absolutely becomes a problem. When we look at creation and divinity outside of the context of monoreality, it is an absolute problem. But not within the context of monoreality. Monoreality's implicit indication is that there is a unity of everything, not a connection, not a fine line, There is a unity of everything. And if from everything we've gone through, we say that the Imam is in the position of the monoreal, what are we saying the monoreal is? What is within and what is outside of the monoreal? I will leave it to your judgment. And the key difference between the position of the Imam and the position of you and I is the experience and the realization of monoreality, and above all, what we looked at within those ayats is the command over monoreality. The command. That command exists only for the Imam, but the experience and the realization of monoreality is not limited to just the Imam. So then I had this really odd title, Perfecting Perfection. How can you perfect perfection? Perfection is already perfect. We've referenced the book Submission to Paradise, and in there is a quote regarding the position of the Imam. And that position of the Imam is his fundamental role. We asked about what is the role of the Imam. And the fundamental role of the Imam is that he is perfect in himself and he makes others perfect. Perfecting perfection. In the physical world, this is nigh on impossible. If you look at somebody who commands a dominion, a king will never make one of his subjects into a king. He will make one of his children into a king or a queen. He will never make a subject into a king because it means a loss for him or her. But again, the beauty of monoreality is that it's not about making multiple kings. It is about making you into one and the same king. There is no duplication. There are no 20 or 20 million kings. There is a realization that you are the king. Remember that story about the conference of the birds and the 30 birds that go and realize they are all one and the same. He is perfect in himself and he makes others perfect. Perfection in the Islamic concept is about realizing your position of monoreality, your position of the single soul, your return to the origin, fanafillah, all these different words that we talk about. They all refer to the same thing. So let's look at an example of perfecting perfection. The story of Adam, the first person created, except not the first person created. We have to really read around our history and what our peers have said about how we interpret the story of creation of Adam, because it is not about the first human being. And a quick indication of that is in the Quran, it specifically says Adam was chosen. You cannot choose unless you have more than one person. Adam was chosen. Was Adam anything more than a normal human being? No, he was just a normal human being. And then the Quran talks about the breathing of the Holy Spirit and the teaching of the beautiful words, the ilmul asma, the beautiful words, the beautiful names of God. What did all that mean? What was the breathing of the Holy Spirit and the teaching of the names? Remember, the beautiful names of God. Go back to what we said about the confluence of two oceans. And there was one particular slide we had up last time that spoke about a barrier between the two sides of the two oceans. And there was one way of crossing that boundary. And that way was Ismi Azam. Ismi Azam is the breathing of the Holy Spirit and the teaching of the beautiful names of God. It is the permission through which a soul can elevate to the highest states. And Adam was a normal human being who had been chosen and given that Ismi by the Imam of the previous time. And this is well documented in Ismaili books of Dais. It was the Ismi given to him by the Imam that nurtured that soul and brought that soul to the position of a prophet, to the position of perfection. And then what did God say in the Quran should happen? God told the angels to prostrate to Adam. If you look at several verses in the Quran, an example being 53:62, it is clear, and generally Muslims will tell you this very quickly. You cannot prostrate to anyone except God. And yet God himself tells the angels to prostrate to Adam. When we look at a non-monorealistic viewpoint, that is a problem. When we look at this from a monorealistic point of view, is it a problem? No. Perfecting perfection. The monoreal, the Imam, made a murid into the monoreal. They became one and the same. As we have said, Adam was elevated from ordinary human status to the level of perfection. And we have been through Usuluddin several times where Imam indicates time and again what our potential is. You can be like Pir Shams, like Pir Sadruddin, you can go even higher. The position of the progeny of Ali that is not just for them, it is for all of us. Perfecting perfection. The hadith Qudsi that says, I was a hidden treasure and I wanted to be recognized. I created creation so that I may be recognized. That wasn't just about the Imams, that is about all of us. So finally, we look at what we conclude as being the role of the Imam as the path to our perfection, not his perfection, to our perfection. And Maulana Ali has said, I am among you like a lamp in the darkness. Whoever enters by it, by this lamp, will be lit from it. And 24:35, where it talks about Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. Imam has referred to this in the memoirs. Imam has referred to this in speeches. This is a very, very important, but a very difficult ayat to truly understand. But it talks about not just the position of Allah as the light. The analysis that our peers have done behind this is the position of the Imam within this context and the role of the Imam to guide us to this ultimate light. And finally, when we talk about monoreality, we talk about the role of the Imam, our role. Remember that in the Quran it is said we are all created in God's image. Surat al-Rahman. We are all created in God's image. Does God have a physical image? No. What does it mean to be created in the image of God? When we look at the concept of monoreality and being that one monoreal in everything we've said, that is the image of God. The image of God is not the bodily form of Shah Karim or the bodily form of Sultan Muhammad or the bodily form of Ali. It is the light within that has been there throughout time, and it is that light which is the light of the heavens and the earth, and it is that light which all of us, were we, as Usuluddin says, to make the effort, all of us could achieve. Thank you, and Yali Madad.
Yeah, Madad. I would like to applaud you first. You have presented such a difficult concept. It shows that this is the content you presented. It's a years of study, learning, all compiled together in such a simpler form, though it is very difficult at the same time. It will take lots of reflection, reading, understanding to truly understand what you just went through. For poor people like me, I might need 20, 30 more sessions. This session being the umbrella session to understand what you are truly telling us. So I find it hard to express how beautifully you have presented such a difficult concept, making it so simple. And this is validated by chat. I do not see any questions, Zahir. And
Thank you.
I can understand that, because what you are sharing is just mind-blowing. Okay, I see a question here now. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Appreciate that. It doesn't sound like related, but I'll ask you, Zahir. Share some light on the concept of Aswari, of the Imam of the time. Oh, and the Battle of Dait Kalinga. This is from Ginan, actually, about Dait Kalinga coming into the end time.
My apologies, Niamat, but I'm not that well versed in too much about Ghanaic literature, so that's something I'd have to go back and look up before I could answer sensibly. So I'd rather be honest and just say I'm not too clear on the answer to that.
Sure, no problem. Okay, and yeah, I see all the very beautiful comments. Wow, and it's like grateful to hear you. Okay, there are a couple questions. Can you please share? Okay, give me one moment. If Isme Azam was given by Imam Hunayd, does it mean that Adam was chosen as a prophet on this earth?
So my understanding about that is that yes, absolutely. Prophets are chosen, and the Quran clearly says that Adam was chosen. The key thing about the relationship with Maulana Hunayd is how are prophets made into prophets. There is one element about choosing somebody for that position, but there is an entire other thing around how that position is actually gained. And it is not an overnight thing. You do not just become a prophet overnight. You have to go through a whole spiritual process of being elevated to that role, of understanding this whole thing of fanafila. Prophets are fanafila. They understand their Lord. They have the universe in them. But that is not an overnight achievement. The breathing of the Spirit, when it talks about the breathing of the Spirit, when it talks about the teaching of the words, these are not instant activities. These are gradual things that occur to all prophets. They go through a lot of trials, they go through spiritual elevation, and they have to work to achieve that status. So yes, there is a choosing, but there is also an awful lot of work that is done, and it is the Ismi Azam that guides that person to become who they are.
So Zahir, Hunayd was the Imam at that time who gave the Isme Azam to Adam, correct?
Yes, correct. So again, one of the things we referred to in the last session was this concept about the continuation of the light of Imamat, that we said that Ali was not the first actual Imam. Ali was the first Imam of this what we know is the cycle of prophethood, that there is a cyclical nature in religion, and that Ali was the first revealed Imam at Qadirekum. But Imams have continued. There has always been divine guidance. You cannot have a time on the earth without divine guidance. And if our understanding of what we've been through with creation and monoreality is that, as Imam has said, creation is a constant and perpetual event, then Adam cannot have been the first creation, because that goes directly opposite to what the Imam is saying about being constant and perpetual. So, and we know from the writings of our peers and dais that there was humanity, there was existence prior to Adam. And in terms of the cyclical nature of the cycles that we have, and again, Nimet, you referred to a book last time. There are other books that talk about the whole cyclical nature. The Imam of that cycle was Imam Hunayd, and it is the Imam's role to give Ismi Azam to Adam and to nurture him and to bring him to that position of prophethood.
Subhanallah, Subhanallah. In relation to what you just said, then how did the angels come down? Because we hear the story of angels.
So there is, so again, one of the things that has been explained in those same books is that when we speak of angels, angels are not necessarily, spiritual things with wings that fly up in the air. We have concept of what's termed as Jamali angels and Jalali angels. And when we are referring to angels, we're actually talking about a term that is used very much in the Fatimid era, which is the Hududaydin. These were the leading peers and dais of the time. Okay, there is a ranking system in Ismaili theology, and that is known as Hududaydin, again written about extensively. The angels that are being referred to here are actually the Hudud. They are the leading entities around the Imam of the time. And the key indication around that is that when Adam was declared as now being a perfect man, your allegiance is to that perfect man. Our fundamental way of doing bay'ah is not just the placing of the hand. If we understand, as we have done throughout the this whole thing of monoreality and what it means to be monoreal, what it means to be perfect, if you have become the perfect man, then our prostration is to that perfect man. And there are actually lots of different things around what that prostration means, and it's too wide a topic to look at in 5 minutes. But the fundamental nature of our allegiance is that prostration is not to the physical body of Adam. That prostration is to the image of the Surat al-Rahman that has been realized within Adam. So when we say we cannot prostrate to anyone except God, it is what we need to understand what is behind that physical body. And that is what that prostration of the angels was about.
Subhanallah, Subhanallah. So another question about prophet, do they achieve this prophet status before they are declared, or as they carry out their mission? So chosen versus selected, I think.
Yeah, I think it's, again, I don't think it's, I'll again profess not to know an exact answer, but my understanding is obviously, your prophethood is not an overnight achievement. And I think that obviously once the prophets become at a certain level, they have achieved, a high enough rank where they are getting wahi. I don't think, my understanding is, I don't think the wahi necessarily occurs only when you have become the perfect man, but the key part of wahi is absolutely around your fanafillah. So I suspect that, when you start calling them a prophet may be a bit of a funny line, but it is certainly very near that time of their completion of their spiritual journey, because the ultimate wahi, when we talk about wahi, we're not talking about God speaking to the prophet. The whole purpose behind this whole concept of monoreality and the concept of unity is that when that individual becomes the monoreal, the way he is not an outside conversation, the way he is that soul itself experiencing things. So when we talk about the words of God, it wasn't an external entity speaking to the prophet. It is the prophet himself experiencing those words within his own self and relaying that as in the form of the Quran. And one thing to relay to that, when the Quran talks about the prophet being illiterate, the illiteracy is not referring to his physical illiteracy. It is well documented that that time of the prophet was very, very heavily based on being able to do business with all the trading that occurred. And most people who did that kind of trading were well educated. They were literate. The illiteracy of the prophet is to do with his illiteracy of spirituality, his illiteracy of not understanding the word of God, not the physical written word. And he became literate when that wahi began within him, when the experience of God occurred in him, and he exposed that as the words of the Quran.
In other words, you are saying that they also go through learning step by step. They also go through this learning of from darjat to darjat. Correct?
Correct, Nemet.
Alhamdulillah. Another question, how does the concept of Imam being infallible be understood in the light of the concept of perfecting the perfection?
So this is again a hot topic for a lot of our youth, is the Imam infallible? And I think that the reference we need to make is again in the memoirs. Is the memoirs, Imam says, what is the concept of free will and predestination in Islam? And in there, Imam gives a very, very nice explanation. And he says, you are free to do as you wish, but God knows what you are going to do. So we are all free to do as we wish, but what we're going to choose is already known. And when we look at that as a concept, when we look at that as in relation to infallibility, infallibility is about, can I make mistakes? Can I make judgments of error? How do we make judgments of error? We make judgments of error when we do not know what is going to happen ahead of time. If we're unclear of what is going to occur as a result of an action that we take, that results absolutely in infallibility. Go back to the whole conversation that we had around what monoreality and manifestation means. And I've referred everybody to, current scientific thinking. They don't have to be accurate or they don't have to be perfect. There are ways of understanding. Even within the scientific realm, there is the concept that you can actually have time that doesn't work the way we work. And in the Quran, it refers to something known as dahr, immovable time. In the spiritual realm, in the monoreal, there is this concept of immovable time. What does immovable time mean? Immovable time means the past, the present, and the future are all now. If at the stage of monoreality, the past and the present and the future are all now, do I not know what is going to occur as well as what has occurred? That is the position of being within monoreality. How it plays out in the physical world is over time. In the physical realm, that immovable time plays out over time. Remember that the Imams work in a physical body. They will have physical ailments like you and I do. They will have physical trials like you and I do. But we have to understand what is within that human body and what is the spiritual position. And if our understanding of the spiritual position is the monoreal, is at the state of immovable time, then past, present, and future all exist now. If past, present, and future all exist now, can I then make a mistake of judgment, an error of judgment? Now, in the physical realm, we may deem things to be an error of judgment. Absolutely. Do we know the implication of that 100 years hence? And the question we have to ask ourselves is what we consider to be a fallibility, an error of judgment. We are basing that on what we have seen as a consequence today. But what if that consequence 100 years hence is completely different? Well, you and I can't judge that. So how can we actually judge whether something was a fallible action or not? And again, it's a personal decision we all need to work through. But my understanding of that immovable time means those actions are infallible. But it's about, do we understand the future implications of what we believe to be a wrong judgment? I hope that answers it.
I agree that it is a journey to learn, and you did a great job in answering. And I see a related question to your answer is Imam immaculate? And I think you have kind of answered that. If you want to add anything, Zahir?
Yeah, I think it's the same. It's the same sort of answer, Niamat. I mean, I think it's really about that understanding of the monoreal, and not considering what the physical is when we're looking at spirituality.
So now I see questions which are topic in itself. Like there are a few questions asking about dreams. There are a few questions about story of Adam, who was Iblis, who is the first soul, how did God manifest the first time, what is the forbidden fruit, and the last one I saw, predestination and free will. So these, I believe, are the topics within itself one cannot just answer in few minutes. Would you agree with that, or do you want to take it up, Zahir, whatever you would like?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these are, as you say, topics in their own right, and there's a lot behind these. I think the only thing I can comment on sort of briefly around the predestination, it's very hard for me to put into words. But I think the thing that the Imam was saying wasn't that whatever you do is predetermined. That isn't the concept. The concept is that you have an intellect, you have a choice to make, and you will make your own decisions. But that within a monorealistic view, what you're going to do, regardless of your choice, is known. Now, these are the Imam's words, not mine. I'm not the Imam. I'm not at the level of the Imam. So all we can do is to try and understand what the Imam meant by God knowing what you're going to do. What is categoric within Imam's own words and within the Quran is there is no concept of predestination. We are all free to make our own choices, whether it be good, whether it be bad. If that wasn't the case, there would be no concept of punishment.
Subhanallah, Subhanallah. I do not see any more related to your topic question. Oh, there's another question which just came in. I'm not sure if you want to take it up. Can you share the knowledge on particles of the soul in the world of particles?
Yeah, again, that's a really big topic. But again, it is, we can't really go into that within a few minutes. But there is this whole concept of souls and how they interact, and there's a philosophy behind the different states of soul and the different levels of manifestation. And just as you have a physical manifestation, so my hand is a physical manifestation, but there are levels of soul. So I have a soul, but my soul doesn't have an understanding of God, but it is still a soul. And the souls actually have a whole philosophy around, or our peers have written about a philosophy of soul and how those souls have different levels of understanding as they go from what we are today to higher levels of spirituality, and how this concept of particles of soul is actually what relates to the entire universe being within you, because everything has a state of soul, whether it's an animate thing or an animate thing, everything has a soul. Again, as I said, this is a really large topic, and we would need to go back to a lot of initial groundwork to be able to cover that in any real depth.
Thank you, Zahir. So you know what? On my session, somebody shared actually a book, a beautiful book titled "What is Soul?" And based on the group request, I will be doing sessions on Wednesday evenings, just discussing that book. So the person who is asking might benefit from that session. And we'll be conducting that session on Wednesdays from 8 to 9 p.m. I have another announcement from Zenith, which is Zahir is going to be talking today at 4 p.m. Toronto time on Zoom. And we will also post his announcement on our Saturday, Sunday Ilmi session site. So you will know how to go to the Zoom to listen to his sessions in the evening time.
The question, it's in the chat, and about the different hadiths. Like, I know that in various talks, and including these ones, beautiful hadiths are quoted. And I'd like to know what's the best source or reference to read these hadiths. Kayal has mentioned a couple of books in the chat, but I'm just wondering, is there any online references, anything you can refer us to as well? And thank you so much for these amazing talks, and Mola bless you and accept all your seva.
Ameen, thank you. So hadith is a really complex topic, because there are lots of discrepancies around what is a valid hadith and what is not a valid hadith. And one of the difficulties of choosing hadith is, if we're talking within a purely Ismaili context, we can refer to a much wider quorum. If we're talking around a general Islamic context, we have a much smaller quorum of hadiths we can refer to, because there is a discrepancy as to what is accepted. Now, there is one reference I'll send to Niamat that she can then share out, which is actually work that's been done to look at all the hadiths that have been accepted across all the major schools of thought in Islam. Those hadiths speak very clearly about the Ahlul Bayt, about Ali, about Fatima, but they are accepted by all Muslims. They're in all the general Sunni books as well as the Shia books. So that's definitely a source to look at, because with those ones, at least you can say these are accepted by everyone. So there's no questioning around those. So I will share that with Niamat.
Thank you, Zahir. We would appreciate that reference resource. Thank you so much. I'm sorry if I missed any comment, any question. It is very hard to keep up with the chat, but I saw Khayal was helping out. So if any question remains, you please feel free to send it to us and we'll forward it to Zahir. Thank you so much, friends, for joining. Thank you again, Zahir. It was truly awesome to have you with us. Yali Madad, Yali Madad.
Thank you very much. Yali Madad, Mola Madad.